Well, good morning, everyone. I'm glad to be joining you, and I'm going to be talking about a tale of two generations. And these are the youngest generations that we have. These are the generations of Gen Z and Millennials. We don't have anything on Alpha yet because they're not old enough to ask survey questions. So as we talk about this is personal because I have children in this category, and I know that some of you have too, and so this is very real. So as we deal with these two generations, and I'm seeing if this is moving on. Did it go backwards? Is it the next one? All right, there we go. Okay, green button. So as we go and deal with these two generations, I want to suggest to you that there is a statistic that has been floating around for about 15 years that says that 70% of our young adults are leaving the church. And when I think about that statistic, I realize that this is not the lost sheep. This is the lost flock. If 70 of your flock are disappearing from your fold, you better do a rapid search and rescue mission. But while we have quoted the statistic, in fact, Josh McDowell wrote a book about 15 years ago where he said the last Christian generation. I want to suggest today that the news is more positive than that. In fact, when you look at what was expected after the pandemic, we have noticed some positive news that actually young people are coming back to church. This is a few weeks ago at my church. This is one Pathfinder club with 114 young people in it. And when I look at that, I say, it's not all bad news. In fact, George Barna released last year. Yeah, can we say amen? God is doing something. Last year, Barna released a report, and Dave Kinnaman, in giving this report, said that the news is far better than we expected. In fact, he goes on to conclude, the rumors of Christianity's demise among younger people are greatly exaggerated. And so we are looking at some very positive things. He notices, for instance, that 65% of teenagers, that's those 13 through 17, in the United States identify as Christian. For years now, we've been seeing the rise of the nones, those not affiliated with any denomination. And now that graph is beginning to even out. And we've seen positive things like this. 6 out of 10 teenagers are motivated to learn more about Jesus. There is a spiritual hunger and a thirst among teenagers that we have not seen for some time. This is good news, folks. In fact, Daniel Copeland, who was the lead researcher on this project, the largest Barna survey that had been done with over 22,000 responses, and it was done across the globe, said this. I'm going to describe it, he said, as the open generation. Why? Because when you look at the data, you don't see any closedness. You don't see any rejection, he means, of their religious faith. This generation is open to learning about Jesus. Can you say amen? The Gen Z generation may be the most open generation we have had in several generations to their religious faith and to learning about Jesus. Now, as I looked at that, I said, and yet, there still seems to be a problem. In that very same church where we have 114 Pathfinders, my wife and I stepped into the collegiate Sabbath school that we were just appointed to help with, and there were just 6 collegiates in that Sabbath school. We looked at the young adults, those post-collegiate, and we saw that they were largely missing from this church that had all of these young people. And then I started to think about every church that I'd visited, and I noticed that the collegiate and post-collegiate group, with a few exceptions, is largely missing. Is this correct? That the young adults are, in fact, leaving. So here we have youth who are interested and enthusiastic, but we have a young adult group who does not appear to be as enthusiastic. So I'm going to look at the data again, and when I do that, I can see the reason why, and it is developing. I want you to take a look at the second line, that's U.S. teens. And on that second line, you can see that what Barna did was they distinguished between teens who said that they are affiliated or connected with Jesus and those who are really committed to Jesus. And they said it's only about half. So of that 65%, 32% are actually committed Christians. But what happens next? The next graph down shows that this is U.S. young adults between the ages of 18 and 22. And of this group, only 17% of that group is really committed to Jesus Christ. So when we look at it, there is a remarkable decline between the teenage years and the college years in our young adult population. And understanding that helps us to know what is really going on, because as we get to the millennial group, which is the next group, we discover that the millennial group is even further away from the church. So in 2021, I did a study, and I asked former members, and I thought, we'll see what we get out of this. Maybe I'll get 100 or 200 who'll respond. I got 700 former Adventists to respond to my survey. And as they responded, most of them, nearly half the group was under the age of 35. So I knew I had data here that we were not getting. You've heard of the Seventh-day Adventist Church survey on former members. What I'm about to share with you was completely different from the results that they got, because I had a younger group. Not only did I have a younger group, but this younger group, 75% of them under the age of 45, this younger group, also, the longer I kept the survey out, I started to hear from some more disgruntled Seventh-day Adventists. And what I realized was that the Adventist Church survey had largely heard from what I might call the former friendlies, the people who still kind of liked us. But this group, now I was hearing from the former unfriendlies, some of the people who weren't as enthusiastic about us. So here was the mind-blowing reason. When I asked, why did you leave the church? The majority answer, the highest answer was doctrinal disagreements. In the Seventh-day Adventist survey that we had done, only 5% indicated doctrinal disagreements. But now I was hearing from a broader, younger audience in the United States, and they were telling me doctrinal disagreements. So I went into the data, and I said, what are they talking about? When we think about doctrinal disagreements, we think Desmond Ford, we think little horns and investigative judgments. No, when they talk about doctrinal disagreements, they're talking about, we don't think the Seventh-day Adventist Church is grace-filled. When they're talking about doctrinal disagreements, some of them are saying, I don't even know if God exists. On my good days, somebody said, I'm an agnostic. On the other days, I'm an atheist. And so when we looked at this details, we said there is something that we're not doing or haven't done that caused this. And what they told us was, they said, there is cognitive dissonance between the rest of my life and my Adventist faith. I felt like I was living in a cave, and I finally came into the light. This is not the way we're wanting to perceive this. And as we started to think about this, and as I was reading their comments, I said, what has happened here is that one of their concerns is not being met. And that is, when we have doubts, we have no place to process those doubts. When we have questions, some said the hard questions don't get asked. People are just believing what their parents believed. We need to be able to do more Adventist apologetics, because we have not been able to defend our faith. And these foundational questions, is God there? Why does He allow suffering? We've sometimes had superficial evangelistic answers that haven't met their deeper questions. And so this was one of the areas. And then I looked back at a previous survey, I forget, 8 years or so ago, where Barna had looked at how Adventist millennials thought about their faith compared to how Christian millennials thought about their faith. And what we discovered was shocking, because what we found was that the Adventist millennials had a much more negative perception of their faith. They called these the 6 grievances of millennials, than did the Christian millennials, where Christian millennials, they said, about 10% of them said, my church, my faith is intolerant of doubt. The Adventist millennials were over 25%. Where they said we were anti-science, the Christian millennials, the Adventist millennials, almost half said we are anti-science. And so as I was looking through this list, on every single area, they perceived the Adventist church more negatively than did their Christian millennials, which suggests one of only two things. Either we're not doing a very good job, or Adventist millennials are more honest. So the first thing that I felt we needed to deal with was this question of doubts. that we needed to help people have a place to process their doubts, to think through those deep, hard questions. The second thing I discovered from my survey was that these former Adventists, who are now millennials, had disconnected from the church. They felt that the church didn't have a place for them, that they couldn't be part of the church life. They couldn't be part of the church leadership. And I'm glad that some things are changing, aren't you? I'm glad that we're beginning to engage the doubts. I'm glad that we're beginning to engage millennials and Gen Z in our church. And I'm glad that my home church has appointed my 17-year-old son, Lord have mercy, to sit on the church board. But this is the kind of thing that is going to stop this disconnection, because we have an engagement gap. We have adventurers and pathfinders. Some of you even have AY. But after AY, there's nothing. There's very little for our young adults. And as a result, they're not in the church. This is what Barna had said that confirms what I found in my study. One of the strengths of Adventist churches is that they have many opportunities for their children and youth to be involved. But there is a difficult transition from child to adult. Young adults have many fewer opportunities. As one person in our post-college discussion group said, if you aren't a child and don't have a child, there's nothing for you. Can we do a better job? I believe we can. This is an important transition. This is an opportunity that we have to grasp. The third area came out as kind of a surprise to me. I asked, what would bring you back to the Seventh-day Adventist Church? And guess what the number one issue was? If the church cared about social issues. This was what would bring former Adventists back into the church. And as I began to look through these things about social issues and if people were less proud and knowing that God was leading me there and finding friends and figuring out my relationship with God, as I looked at this, the key idea that I came up with is that these millennials felt disillusioned. They said the church doesn't care. The church lacks compassion. The church lacks humility. The church lacks integrity. These were the kinds of things that they were bringing out in their survey. And I said, how can we stop disillusionment from infecting the next generation? Because when I look at each one of these, doubts and disconnection and disillusion, it's a tough hoe. It's a tough way to bring them back when they're going through these things. But if we could go to the next generation, and if we can help the next generation to process their doubts, to be connected to the church, if we can prepare them for future disillusions, that this church is Laodicea, that this remnant is ragged, if we can help them work through those things, then maybe they will be able to stay in the church and help us, because this next generation is exciting. This next generation, Generation Z, they have potential. But I've also discovered that they have a pandemic. And the pandemic that I'm talking about is not COVID. Lord have mercy, it's time to get beyond the masks and the vaccines and everything else that we've been struggling with in our churches and the different sides and how people almost killed each other over these things. But we need to figure out that there is another pandemic going on. It is a pandemic of mental health. And that mental health is causing these things, depression and anxiety. So this blows my mind. 42% of Gen Z, according to a survey from last year, have a diagnosed mental health condition. Did you get that statistic? That's 4 out of 10. 52% just say, I'm struggling with depression and anxiety. Almost 1 in 4 reported having more bad days than good days in August of last year. 1 in 5 are going to therapy. 57% have reported taking some kind of medication to help them. This is a pandemic, and we have not dealt with it as a church. If we want to be successful in reaching Gen Z, we have to see them as people who are going to need our support. Now, the good news is that the young people themselves, 73%, agree that their religious and spiritual practices positively impact their mental health. In fact, good news, if you are a regular going church member, your mental health is almost double, your optimism and your resilience is almost double that of an atheist or agnostic. We should have new ads. Don't just try Prozac, try the church. show the depressed people beforehand, the happy people afterwards, and say, maybe church could help you. Studies show that you are 50% more likely to be happy if you're in church. Side effects may include disillusionment, hypocrisy, judgmentalism, and irrational beliefs. But we have an opportunity, folks, to speak into their lives. We have an opportunity to walk alongside of them, but they're facing a second part of this pandemic, which is loneliness. And this has gotten worse in every generation. This is the loneliest generation ever, and those are not my words. And the loneliness means not only a lack of connection with friends, but a lack of connection with parents. 61% of young adult people agree that the adults in my life don't truly know how much I'm struggling with my mental health. They are walking this path of mental health, but they are walking a lonely path because people are not connecting with them. Their parents are not connecting with them. And as a result, they are depressed. Despite being digital natives, this is what the Barna study of 2020 showed, only 1/3 of this connected generation say that they feel deeply cared for by those around me. You reverse that statistic. 2/3 don't feel a close connection. We are lacking a connection with young adults. And they are lacking a connection with each other. Social media is killing our young people because they are seeing pictures that are highly curated, that are touched up, that show people having fun. And I told my young adults, I say, you know, when they're taking that picture showing how much fun they're having, they're not actually having fun because they spent 5 minutes taking the picture to show that they were having fun at a party they weren't having fun at because they weren't caught up in the party, they were caught up in taking the picture. So this is a problem. They are feeling lonely and we are not aware of their loneliness. And that's why one of the highest spiritual practices at my university is small groups, is life groups. This is where people are connecting with their faith and with each other. The third one is sexuality. And this is a pandemic, and it is causing all kinds of mental health struggles. This is a Barna study from 2021, and it blew me away. 39% of Gen Z identify as LGBTQ+. This is Gen Z Christians. And so when you look at this, you say, whoa, what's going on here? And then he goes on to say, when he says identify as, what he thinks that many of them are doing is identify with. If their sense is that some of the people they want to be friends with and a group they want to be accepted by is LGBTQ, then they'll identify with them because it's about image, belonging, and acceptance. I teach a class on sexuality and scripture alongside of my wife. That class has, and I say this not because we're such great teachers, but because I believe this is the need, it has become the most popular class on the campus. It opens at midnight, and it is full by 12:03. And the reason why it's full, we have 112 students in that class. And the reason why it's full is because there is a desperate need. People are telling me, I had permission to share as they open up to us in a journal entry. One is saying, look, this is close to me. I have same-sex attraction, but I can't talk about it. If I talk about it, I'm afraid that people will see that I have some kind of problem and will run after me kind of shouting, unclean, unclean. If they can't talk about it, they say, I don't want gay to be attached to my name because that's going to affect people's perceptions of me and who I room with and what people at church think of me. If that's the way people feel, where are we going to talk about it? Where are we going to have the place where people can process their sexuality? Not only that, but we know that we have a major problem with pornography. 25% of total searches are related to pornography. The average age of exposure is between the ages of 8 and 11 before they even hit puberty. And the result is actually less sex and more self-sex. Less mutual sex, more self-sex. And people are living with guilt. They're living with shame. They are living with sometimes a disconnection from God and the church, and they don't feel like we can talk about this. I believe that there is great potential in this generation. And while there is great potential, while they are enthusiastic about learning more about Jesus, while they are enthusiastic about church and how it can make a positive difference in their lives, I also believe that if we get it wrong, this may be our last chance. God is calling us to make a difference in this generation, to reach the millennials we can, and to save Gen Z, because Gen Z is our future.